Welcome to everyone who's already joining us online for today's Departmental Seminar in Language and Linguistics. Today's talk is going to be by Billy Setiawan, who's at Central Queensland University in Australia, discussing exploring interculturality in Indonesian English language classrooms. So looking at Indonesian context where English is being used in the classroom. Billy began his education and teaching in Indonesia, doing his bachelor's at Linus University before going on to doing a master's degree in intercultural communication here in the UK, the University of Manchester. Recently, he's done his PhD at the University of South Australia in applied linguistics. He has a lot of teaching experience, both English and communications in Indonesian context, as well as in the Chinese context, and now in an Australian context. But a lot of the research has focused on the use of English in classrooms in Indonesia. So we're looking forward to hearing insights you have to share with us today from your research and having some discussion to what this particular context contributes to our understanding of how English is used in education. So we'll give Billy about 30 to 40 minutes to give the presentation. There'll be time for questions afterwards. So we'll manage those questions at the end of that time. So over to you, Billy.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Joy. Thank you for the introduction, and lovely to see everyone here. My name is Billy Setiawan. I'm from the School of Access Education, Central Queensland University, Australia. And today I'll be sharing with you one of the projects that I've been doing, exploring interculturality in Indonesian language classroom. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I work, live, and learn, and pay respect to the elders, past, present, and emerging. I'm located in Bundaberg, a town a few kilometers north of Brisbane, the capital of Queensland. And as much as I hate being stereotypical, but I'd love to show you these pictures that I took outside my office. So this is like my daily view. I'm seeing kangaroos just chilling outside my office, and it's lovely to see this like almost every day. In this presentation, I'd like to invite you to explore how interculturality is perceived and enacted by local English language teaching and learning practitioners in an Indonesian university. So it's part of a broader project that I did for my PhD, which was to examine possibilities that an intercultural perspective offers to provide meaningful English language education in Indonesia. So I will first explain why interculturality matters in English language education. I will also introduce briefly the context in Indonesia, and I will provide an overview of the literature, particularly in intercultural language teaching and learning, and I will guide you through the research process until the findings and conclusion. So what is interculturality and why does it matter in English language education? Traditionally, English language education was conducted within a monolingual and monocultural perspectives, aiming for native speaker proficiency and also expecting students to speak and act like native speakers. However, critics argue that that kind of paradigm is no longer relevant in the context of globalization, because that kind of paradigm treats English as static and fixed system of knowledge and meaning, while these days English is spoken by people from different nationalities, different languages and cultures. So such paradigm sort of like failed to acknowledge the hybridity of English. And scholars argue for the need for an alternative orientation that recognizes the hybridity of English and also to help prepare students to navigate in the diverse environment of English speakers in today's globalization. And when we look up the definition of interculturality in dictionary, for example, it says anything involving more than one culture, anything involving multiple cultures can be defined as interculturality. But in foreign language education, there have been some, notable terms involving this concept. For example, the very influential intercultural communicative competence, which emphasizes skills, attitude, and knowledge for effective communication in culturally diverse contexts, and also the symbolic competence, referring to ability to not just use language, but also to understand and interpret symbolic meanings, symbolic values, and power dynamics behind the use of language. And then in this particular study, interculturality is focused on in the context of language learning as a process of moving between languages and cultures when students learn a new language. It bring us to the context of the study, which is Indonesia. Indonesia is one of the most linguistically and culturally diverse countries. It consists of more than 300 ethnic groups, as well as over 700 local languages and local dialects. So in everyday communication, people in Indonesia navigate between multiple languages. For example, at home, they speak a local language or local dialect with the family, while at work or at schools, they use the national language, Indonesian or Bahasa Indonesia. And they are also involved in using English in a global context. So there is like this, diversity of language that people in Indonesia use. But despite this diversity, English language education has been historically shaped by imported pedagogical paradigm. For example, the English language education in Indonesia have always implemented, the one approach fits all sort of paradigm. For example, the grammar translation, audiolingual, as well as communicative language teaching. But research shows that there are like some tensions between this policy, this curriculum policy, and what is happening in the classrooms, because such approaches have not appropriately acknowledged the use of multiple languages in the classroom. So it creates like pedagogical tensions for the teachers between fulfilling the requirements from the curriculum and also attending the needs of the multilingual and multicultural students in the local classrooms. So that's where intercultural language teaching and learning becomes relevant, because this perspective, this intercultural language teaching and learning, is grounded in the idea that language, culture, and learning are inseparable. So when students learn a new language, they reflect on their already existing languages and cultures as resources to make meanings, as resources to make sense of their learning. So within this perspective, learning is seen as interpretive, where students actively draw on their life experiences, their languages, their cultures, and their identities, again, to make sense of learning. So learners or students are seen not as empty vessels, but they are active meaning makers. Several scholars have theorized, characteristics of intercultural language teaching and learning. For example, it's personalized because it incorporates the linguistic and cultural realities of the students for engaging meaningfully in the learning. It is also conceptual. It elicits abstract understanding of a concept and connecting that with the broader idea. It recognizes the role of multiple languages that students have and they bring to the classroom in the attempt to make sense of the learning. It's also interactive. It's learned to interactions with peers, with teachers, also learned to experiencing the language and mediated by the teachers. It also involved reflections of students' own and others' framework of languages and culture. Despite this sort of like orientation has been studied for over decades, there are also some problems with the existing model of intercultural language teaching and learning. For example, interculturality in the existing models is often framed as interaction simply between one singular language and culture of the students and one fixed target language and culture. So in most cases, culture is treated as homogeneous and fixed and treated as a national entity. While in today's globalization, again, cultures is seen as hybrids. It involves like mixing of, like backgrounds, language, and cultures. And also within the existing framework, students are often positioned as cultural outsiders who need to be socialized into, the English speaking or the native speaker norms. So multilingual realities of the students are often under theorized. Recent scholarship has called for a more fluid understanding of interculturality. And then this is where this study tries to respond to that call by exploring the novel depictions of interculturality from observation of what is happening in the classroom. So this study adopted a qualitative case study approach, exploring the lived experiences of the teachers when enacting intercultural orientation in English language teaching and learning. It recognized reality as subjective and also shaped by social interactions. And then data was taken from an international university in Jakarta, capital of Indonesia. So this university had some collaborations with American partner universities. So they adopted the curriculum, they imported the materials, the textbook, assessment, and so on and so forth. And this study involved two English language teacher participants. The first one is Sekar. Sekar is a female local teacher teaching English for academic purposes, focusing on communication skills. And the second was Chiweka, a male local teacher teaching composition one. So data was mostly collected through these stages. The first one, document analysis, where I examined the nature of the curriculum and also the suitability to the local context. And then from that, I conducted preliminary teacher interviews where I sought teacher understandings of the current curriculum and also the changes they consider necessary to provide a meaningful English language teaching and learning. And then from that, I match the emerging themes from the interview with the key characteristics of intercultural language teaching and learning that I explained earlier. And then from that, we co-designed interventions, some series of lessons incorporating the features of intercultural language teaching and learning. And also I conducted classroom observation, debriefing, and also discussion, and if needed, the same cycle of this data collection. And to analyze the data, I use this framework. So like to analyze the emerging themes against the key characteristic of intercultural language teaching and learning. So I aim to understand how the teachers taught about interculturality and how they enacted that in practice. So individual engagement of the students and also with the teachers in terms of how they practice interculturality in the classroom. So in terms of the findings from Sakar's intervention, Sakar conducted two different interventions because she was really keen to explore this concept. So together we co-designed two series of lessons. The first one is about food crisis, and then the second topic or concept was about fusion. And then these are some emerging themes arising from Sakar intervention. First, the need for connections to students' life and local realities, and also linguistic fusion, intercultural engagement through global Englishes, and then reflection of cultural values in national sphere. So for example, from this classroom interactions between Sakar and her students, in one episode, they were learning about vocabulary related to food crisis. So after the vocabulary matching activities, learning about definition from textbook and dictionary, Sakar prompted students to connect the meaning definition of the words to where they were located and where they lived then. It should be noted that this study was conducted during the COVID pandemic. So it was online learning where students were located in different areas in Indonesia. And three students here participated in the discussion, expressing their own understanding of deforestation while connecting that to their surrounding. For example, the first student here, Gali, he expressed his understanding of deforestation. I think Gali was located in the island of Sulawesi, and for him, deforestation meant that trees are getting taken down because people need to build more houses for more housings, because apparently it was an issue in her local surrounding. While Fauzi, the second student, he was located in Kalimantan, where the new capital of Indonesia was being built. So for him, deforestation meant trees have been flattened for the purpose of building, the new capital. And then interestingly, the third student, Ellen was in Jakarta, and she struggled to, find definition of deforestation because she didn't really see any of those around her. She said that she cannot call it deforestation because people just, cut down trees because they just getting big and getting in their way. So I found it quite interesting, like when Sakar attempted to personalize meaning of like some English words, some of the target words, and then contextualize that in the student's own, local surrounding. It prompted, localized English meanings as, discussed by Kanagaraja, for example, and Sakar utilized local resources for meaning making. So learning a new language here goes beyond just, learning from textbook or definition from dictionary, but Sakar really prompted personalization of meaning, personalization of learning itself. And then the second emerging theme from Sakar intervention was about linguistic fusion. I think they were talking about like different English accents for the purpose of like a better communication, understanding or effective communication. And then they were watching a video from an Australian chef talking about fusion in food, and then like talking about some features of different English accents. And then at the end of that, Sakar asks students, so which kind of English do you speak? And then one student, Ricky, proudly announced, oh, my own accent. And then when prompted to explain what he meant by own accent, he expressed like the influence of the national language Indonesian accent, and also the local accents influencing the way they speak the national language, and also the way they speak English. So I found it quite powerful when students were allowed like to say that, oh, I speak my own accent, instead of like I identify my accent as like closer to British or American, or and so on and so forth. So Sakar validated students' multilingual reality, and also Sakar illustrated the intersections between local, national, and global Englishes in spoken terms especially. So it challenged the monolingual and native speaker norms, and also prompted reclamation of ownership of English that some scholars have been talking about. And the third emerging theme, it's intercultural engagement through global Englishes. I think they were talking about, like how people sort of like mixed again, like the accents. And then one student, Zul, I think he was illustrating the encounters that he had with Japanese speaker of English in the online video gaming, because apparently that's where he learned English from the most. Yeah, so from like playing online games. So he was able to identify, oh, they speak their own accent as well. And then Sakar sort of like explained, oh yeah, we cannot really identify 100% that we belong to, this particular, native speaking accent, but we speak, English accent differently. So Sakar promoted acceptance of diversity in global Englishes, and also shifting away from native speaker norms and validating students' own accents. And also this also prepared students for intercultural engagement, intercultural encounters with a speaker from different nationalities. And then the last one, Sakar also focused on reflection of cultural values in national sphere. So this is like where interculturality was mostly happening. So they were talking about food crisis and in different regions in Indonesia, and they particularly talk about cultural beliefs of the people there, because like the people in the Sumba Island, for example, they believe that the land, their hometown, was a gift from their ancestors, and then they need to look after that, and then they will be punished or they'll be cursed if they leave the hometown. So Sakar prompted students to reflect whether or not they have similar value, and students express different beliefs based on where they're from, for example. So the focus here was mostly on internal cultural diversity within Indonesia, which is positioned as the site of otherness. So before interacting with the culture of the target language, or global Englishes, prompted students to reflect on internal cultural diversity within the national context. After the interventions, I conducted debriefing interviews with Sakar, in which she reflected on the enactment of the intervention, particularly the first one, where she discussed, what they got from the activity, of like discussing vocabulary and connecting that to students' local realities. And then Sakar believed that students were able to get a clear picture of how and when to use these words, and also which situation they use the words to describe. And it also facilitated exchanges of ideas from different areas in Indonesia. So that's where like sort of like interculturality happens first and foremost. And also she again emphasized, that like we cannot just say English is owned by certain people or culture. And then she wanted her students to be able to use English in their own way, to talk about their own culture, to talk about many cultures, instead of just attaching that to a particular cultural community of English. And then she believed that through this, intercultural perspective in English language education, language learning could be more meaningful, and then also more sustainable, can stay longer for the students. So if I was to summarize that, so for Sakar, interculturality in her classroom involved personalization of meaning, also contextualization of meaning and language use, conceptual learning, understanding concept from different cultural perspective, and also recognizing multiple languages that students have in the classroom. And then Sakar afforded opportunity for intercultural engagement in terms of raising student self-awareness and reflexivity of their own and others' linguistic and cultural resources, and also feelings of belongings to the existing language communities, not just the English-speaking communities, but also their local and national language communities. And then prompted students to like illustrate their imagined multilingual identities in using languages. And the second teacher participant, Chiweka enacted, less time for the intervention, because Chiweka really focused on, fulfilling the requirement from the curriculum. So unless Sakar, who was really eager in exploring this concept, Chiweka only spent like a couple of lessons enacting this intercultural language teaching and learning. So because the subject that Chiweka taught was Composition 1, teaching students how to write English academic writing. So we thought that it would be a good idea to discuss, the concept of criticality, one important aspect in academic writing. What I found very interesting here, that Chiweka and the students understood criticality as, like offering critique, offering criticism, and also feedback. So they use these three understanding interchangeably when they were talking about criticality. For example, here, Chiweka asked the students, so how do you normally offer, critique or feedback? And then one student teacher, I believed, so she related that to her occupation, her aspiration to be a teacher. So she said that when I offer feedback to my students, I first, compliment the student that you are doing a good job, you did a good job, and also, expressing the areas that needs improvement. So in a way, it's like more indirect, and then like offering suggestion which area to improve, and then the last one offering encouragement, motivation. So criticality here was understood as both culturally embedded and also academically required. So they explored definition of an English academic concept within the local communicative practices, and also in a way, it challenged the banking model of language education, because instead of just like teaching, okay, a criticality is this, so you need to apply that in your writing. So Chiweka facilitated students to, reflect on their own understanding or conception of criticality within the local communicative practice. So from that, Chireka understood interculturality, again as a personalized definition, contextualized in the local communicative practice, and also allowing multilingual views, multiple reflection on multiple languages, and also reflection of own framework, and also the framework of criticality in the Western academic context. In that way, CQUiVK afforded opportunities to raise student awareness and reflexivity of their own and other linguistic and cultural resources, and also students' feeling of belonging to existing language community. Because in the broader interactions in CQUiVK intervention, they also discussed a popular Indonesian pop song that criticized the government in humorous way. So it gave like students like feelings of belonging to the existing language community that they have in the local context. So if I summarized all those interactions from the two cases, in SECAR interventions, interculturality happens between student and students, and also people of an ethnic group in Indonesia through discussion of the text, and also between student and student in discussing food security in the country, between student and student in discussing enculturation in their immediate context, and also between them and then the global English communities when they discussed English accents. And then in CQUiVK's context, interculturality happens between student and also their conception of criticality in the local context. Moving on to the national context through discussing a popular song expressing criticality, and also between student and the English-speaking conception of criticality in academic writing. If I could illustrate, the intercultural interactions in an Indonesian English language classroom. So it first happened, between local languages, local perspectives, local values of the students, moving on to comparisons and also reflection on their on their national language and culture, and before interacting with the target language and culture. And then it should be noted here that the target language and culture is not only about the native speaking English speakers, for example, but also global English speakers, as seen with from the reflection of the students having interactions with Japanese English speakers. So from this, students are not confined to a single culture, as we can see here, even though they are all from Indonesia, but they have like distinct or different, local frameworks of their own language and cultures. They are culturally constructed through interactions with peers, with context, and also with content of the learning. And as we can see here, the teacher's enactment of intercultural language teaching and learning positioned intercultural exchange as a means to first understand and navigate local perspectives. I think it was heavily present, particularly in SECAR interventions, where when she really prompted students to personalize the meaning, to share the local values and perspective before interacting with the culture of English in the global context. Although there were like some nice findings there, I would like to also acknowledge the challenges and limitation of the study. It was constrained by an imported curriculum from the US due to the collaborations with the partner universities. So we didn't really have much space to make changes in the curriculum. And then that's why we were not able to, design the curriculum for the whole semester, but we were only able to design a series of lessons, a small portion in the curriculum. And then it was also conducted during the COVID pandemic. So it was online learning where we couldn't really see the students. So the intercultural engagement might be limited, and then we relied a lot on the spoken, interactions in the online learning or online classrooms. And what I found quite interesting as well is also the participants' reliance on researchers' facilitation. For example, instead of like designing the lessons themselves, they relied so much on my facilitation, my initiation, for example. I think it can be related to the local communicative practice where, we tended to, avoid this agreement to keep a harmonious relationship. So it's something that should be noted as well. But it also tells that intercultural language teaching and learning is a complex and negotiated practice, not a simple pedagogical add-on that teachers, wherever they are, can implement. But there are negotiations with, for example, the requirements of the curriculum, the learning mode itself, and also the relationship between the teachers and also the institution and also the researchers. And in terms of the implication of the study, I think in the last few decades, scholars highlight the importance of incorporating local context into English language education curricula and practices in terms of like the materials, the interactions, for example. And from this study, we could also see like students learned about vocabulary, about grammar, about structure in academic writing, for example, but they also but the learning also went beyond that, where they contextualized, where they personalized, their understanding of particular concept or vocabulary. So I think there needs to be like a rethink of, the goals in English language education that should go beyond just, like grammatical knowledge, skills, and so on and so forth. And also, from this intervention, intercultural language teaching and learning should not only focus solely on the target language and culture, but also students engage in the classroom with diverse linguistic and cultural perspectives before they interact with the target language and culture. And data from the study was mostly taken from the teacher's perspective, like how they understood interculturality and how they enacted that in practice. But intercultural learning itself is inherently dialogic. So I think future studies could also explore student contribution, student perspectives about interculturality when they learned a new language. So I think that's it from me. And yeah, I welcome any questions that any of you might have.
It's great. Thank you very much. Really, yeah, really interesting study. Good to see, despite the challenges of COVID, the amount you were able to get their insights. We do have time for questions and discussion. So if anyone online wants to ask a question, you have a few options. You can use the raise hand function, and then I'll allow you to unmute yourself and ask your question, or you can type your question into the chat or the Q&A, and I'll read it out for you. So if there's no one with an immediate question, I can ask the first one. I was interested in what your reflection has been since this study on now having time teaching in Australia, where it's less diverse linguistically, culturally, still some diversity there. Are there some lessons from this study that now you've applied to your teaching and helping students who maybe already have an English speaking background, maybe are less culturally diverse, but do need to figure out how to adapt and understand academic use of English in their context to grow in that? What are some parallels that you've been able to apply there? And maybe they're more aware of like world English, Australian not being maybe the most central version of English as well. How is that translated to your teaching in that context?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for the questions. I think what I learned from that study and then what I can, implement in my current teaching is that, like again, the hybridity of language, hybridity of culture, because like English cannot be seen as like one, linguistic or cultural identity. And I found it quite interesting here in Australia because previously I taught in a big city in Adelaide. Well, now I'm teaching in a regional areas, regional towns. Even these two places, even these people, have English as a first language, but they bring different perspective in the class. For example, because like here in the regional town, we have like more diverse backgrounds of their social cultural background, students from more diverse social cultural backgrounds here. So it's all interesting when they ask students, like, so what do you understand about this concept? And, what do you understand about, this definition? How do you normally practice that in your daily, communication? And then, yeah, it's always interesting to see that, they were able to offer, different perspective, different expression. So even like within, the the students who speak, the same language, but they also have like different perspectives. So again, it shows me that like the hybridity of language and culture itself. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I assume some of that will apply to the UK context as well, as we help students navigate the way they use maybe their regional dialects or their everyday language versus sort of academic language as well. Um, so feel free to stick your question in the chat Q&A if you have one. Also ask you a bit more about the Indonesian context. You mentioned that there was a bit of a lack of initiative, maybe on part of the teachers, and sort of taking this concept and going above and beyond how they apply it. Can you say more about the cultural context there? Because I mean, my impression of the context is that it is a bit more hierarchical, both in terms of student-teacher relationships, but also from like the teacher to the university hierarchy relationship. That people don't necessarily see themselves in a role of innovating and doing their own thing versus sort of doing what they're told to do from above. Is that a fair characterization of the Jakarta context, and is that different than the Australian context? Do you see that view of hierarchy or view of the role being a factor in how innovative different institutions might
Mm.
be in caring for these ideas about the way you can use English in a classroom?
Yeah, I think it also tells me about, like teacher agency, in their practice, because perhaps, there's like more sort of like expectation for the teachers in Indonesia to, follow the required instructions. Well, I see like here, I think people like teachers have like more agency to, like modify and come up with like initiative in their teaching. Yeah, I think it also tells me about like teacher agency in their practice. Yeah.
So there's less empowerment maybe of teachers to be able to feel like they're free to go and explore these kinds of things.
Yeah.
One question is coming from online participant. Is there anything particular about English versus other languages as medium of instruction in terms of its social or cultural role in this classroom? Or is this transferable to other contexts, like other languages being used as medium of instruction?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for the question. In Australia itself, I think like we've been implementing this intercultural language teaching and learning in the studies of other languages as well. So in the Australian curriculum, for example, in the school curriculum, so we've been adopting this perspective, this intercultural perspective in also in French classroom, in Spanish classroom, for example. So yeah, so it's definitely transferable to other contexts. It's like I think the idea is like facilitating students to reflect, on their own cultural, linguistic, and cultural frameworks, and also with the frameworks from the target culture. Yeah.
I think that probably applies to my own context learning French in France, but also being exposed to French in Quebec and French in Africa, where I ended up working and having that framework of they're going to teach me in a specific way, but I have a little bit more awareness of like the variation in the
Mhm.
language was helpful.
Yeah.
Good. Well, if there's no more further questions, I know it's getting late at night there for you in Australia, Billy. Thank you very much for joining us and presenting this research. I hope that was helpful for you as well. And all the best to you in your continued teaching. Thank you, everyone, for joining us online also.